Starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody, and happy Monday to you all. My name is Joe Macbeth, and I welcome you all to the second in our series of webinars for the New York State Office for People with Developmental Disabilities and their regional centers for workforce transformation. This is a one-hour session, and I am pleased to be joined by my good friend and colleague, John Rafaelle. Today's webinar is largely a review for our New York audience. The NADSP had worked for much of last year on spreading the why and the how of workforce transformation. And before we begin, there we are. Oh, geez. I'm Joe Macbeth, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Alliance for Direct Support Professionals. I live in Albany, New York. And John, you want to say hello to everybody?
Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. Happy spring. My name's John Rafaelle. I'm the guy. I've got a little more gray hair, I have to admit. I'm the guy on the right. I work all around the country supporting the cause of supporting direct support professionals to rise to the top of the page. New York State is doing that in earnest, and we're going to talk about that today. So that's who I am.
Thank you, John, and thanks for joining us. So let's begin. Before we begin, I just want to make a quick announcement that we will be emailing everyone who is on this webinar today with a very short survey. This is a funded project, and we need to provide our funders with an evaluation of these webinars. So please respond to these surveys that you'll be receiving within the next hour. We would like to thank the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities of New York State and the Developmental Disabilities Planning Council of New York State for partnering with us on this project today. So let's begin. Transformation. What is transformation, and how are we going to do it? Transformation is a buzzword that you hear all around the country in human services, specifically in intellectual and developmental disabilities services, with complying with new state and federal regulations, and providers of services, residential services and employment services and day services are being asked to be more person-centered, helping people be more autonomous. And this is really changing the way people receiving services will have opportunities. And transformation is no easy thing. And if you think about New York specifically, a multi-billion-dollar industry in IDD services and supporting approximately, at last I heard, 127,000 people. It's not an easy thing to do, but yet you hear the word transformation, and you cannot transform a system of this magnitude without transforming the direct support workforce. They are the key to quality, and if anybody has ever heard the NADSP talk about quality services, you know that we define quality at the point of interaction. And if we are going to transform a large system that includes probably at least 100,000 direct support professionals, well, then we need to get the word out. We need to get the word out strong and clear, and there's a process to this, and that's what today is going to be all about. But I just want to show you one thing before we go on a little bit more about transformation and why we're doing this transformation. Let's take a look at the evolution of a word. Transformation is a new word. We didn't start using it until the Kennedy administration, and then it took off. And I don't know, there's a little dip there in the Carter-Reagan era, but you know, this is a new word, and it's something that you're gonna hear a lot more about in human services. This is a nice chart that I often use with audiences that come to hear NADSP's Code of Ethics encounters and whatnot. When we talk about any business, whether it's human services or banking or industry or manufacturing, you need to continually evolve. You need to continually grow and respond to demand. You know, I often use the question, you know, how many of you here today look down at your desk and find a pager? And the answer is very few, because pagers are just not used anymore. They didn't advance. They didn't evolve. They've been replaced by our smartphones. And on our smartphones, most people don't stop and buy maps when they get to some place where they have to go. They use their GPS. So you see how all businesses evolve, and ours is no exception to that. This is a really nice graphic when you take a look at it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but it really does show how the era of membership is where we're working towards. And even beyond the era of membership is helping people direct the course of their own lives. And that responsibility often relies on direct support professionals, helping the people they support understand everything there's needed to know about certain decisions, big decisions and small decisions, and providing them with the information and the resources in a way that is understandable, and helping people understand the consequences of decisions. And these decisions are theirs, and direct support professionals in the caretaking world are very comfortable in making decisions for people. Direct support professionals in the support world, which is part of this transformation, are more interested in helping people understand the responsibility of making their own decisions. So we're working towards an evolution of caregiving to providing support. And that is a major, major change, because for years of community-based services, direct support professionals were focusing on helping people remain healthy and safe. And we'll always do that. We'll always help people remain healthy and safe, but we're also going to be balancing that with helping people take some risk and make decisions that we may not agree with. So that is part of the whole evolution of our field. And by the way, this PowerPoint, unlike most of the NADSP PowerPoints, we don't like to give them away. This PowerPoint will be posted on the Workforce Transformation website, and I'll share that site with you at the end of this session. New Yorkers know why we're doing this. In 2011, the New York Times, a rather large newspaper outlet, ran a series of articles that depicted the state of human services in IDD as abusive and neglectful. And they ran about 15 articles in the New York Times, and this was the first one, at State-Run Homes, Abuse and Impunity, with that picture on the front page of a Sunday New York Times. And as you all know, a lot of people read the Sunday New York Times. Well, this was, talk about transformation, this was transformative in New York State, because from this a lot of attention was given to how people with disabilities, developmental disabilities, are supported in New York State, and what are the roles of direct support professionals. And from these newspaper articles, you know, right after this one, the NADSP, we were contacted by the New York State Office for People with Developmental Disabilities and asked for some suggestions on helping to improve not only the image of direct support professionals, but their skills and their values. And what we told them is, that you should probably do, is take a look at the NADSP's Code of Ethics and consider adopting the Code of Ethics. And we'll get into that later on. But as you all know from these newspaper articles, it led directly to the creation of New York State's Justice Center for the Protection of People with Special Needs. And the Justice Center is a law enforcement organization that was established with unanimous legislative backing in record time to protect people with special needs. And everybody is interested in protecting people with special needs. And from this became this organization that will prosecute abusers and people who neglect people, but their mission is also to support the workforce. And this is a complicated issue. A lot of direct support professionals that we speak with see the Justice Center as a scary and spooky entity that is out to get us, and that's not true. Their mission is to protect people, and yes, if there are predators among the direct support professional workforce in New York State, they will get you, and they will also support the vast majority of direct support professionals who are doing incredibly good work. So from those New York Times articles came, the first thing that came from that was the Justice Center. And when we read the Justice Center legislation, we said, well, wait a second, not so fast. It's kind of like closing the barn door after the horse is bolted. We're going to investigate after the allegations have been made, and we're going to prosecute after the person has been found to have been abusive, and we will put these people on an exclusion list so they will never be able to work with vulnerable New Yorkers again. All good things, all very important things, but again, what about the direct support professionals, the 99.9% of those direct support professionals who do their work every day in a very unspectacular fashion? How are we going to develop them? How are we going to transform them into a powerful workforce that has knowledge, skills, and values? How are we going to empower them to help people make their own decisions? That's nowhere to be found in the Justice Center legislation. As good as that legislation and as important as that legislation is, developing the workforce and transforming the workforce, for one, is not their responsibility. For two, it's nowhere to be found in there. So prior to this legislation, there was a lot of things going on during the time where every month there was a new New York Times article coming out about the bad things that were happening. And those stories sell newspapers, make no exception. But at that time, Governor Cuomo, New York's Governor Cuomo, consulted with a team of very highly regarded professionals led by a man named Clarence Sundrum. And Clarence Sundrum spent a good part of the year talking about, or meeting with people, meeting with stakeholders, and investigating cross-sector IDD, behavioral health, child welfare, substance abuse and addictions. How is abuse and neglect reported? How is it defined? What are the statistics of abuse and neglect across these service sectors? He met with a lot of people. He met with direct support professionals. And just prior to the Justice Center legislation being announced, Sundrum issued a report, and I would encourage you all to read it. It's still highly relevant today. It's called The Measure of Society. If you just Google The Measure of Society by Clarence Sundrum, it'll take you to that report. It's also on the Justice Center's website. And Sundrum wrote this: direct support jobs are compensated poorly, with many workers living at or near the poverty level or forced to work multiple jobs to make ends meet. We know this to be true everywhere we go in virtually every state in this country. One might summarize the job description of the direct support worker as requiring the wisdom of Solomon, the patience of Job, and the caring of Florence Nightingale. Okay, that gets your attention, but I can tell you that direct support professionals don't see themselves that way. I think we need to see direct support professionals as professionals and not these angels. But I give him a pass because in the very next paragraph, Sundrum writes this: while much is said about the value of these direct support jobs, the traditional hallmarks of value are often missing. Qualifying credentials, adequate pay, career ladders, attention to working conditions, adequate training, managerial and supervisory support, and so on. These things is how a workforce transformation will happen. You need to take on every one of them. with no exception. Credentialing, career ladders, wages, working conditions, the support they receive from their supervisors, not to be found in the Justice Center, but will be taken up by the regional centers for workforce transformation. You'll find that at the Measure of Society, Protection of Vulnerable Persons in Residential Facilities Against Abuse and Neglect by Clarence J. Sundrum, 2012, a transformative piece of writing, in my opinion. But, you know, we can't go on without talking about the feds. And the feds are the people who give the states a lot of money to support people with disabilities to live in the community through their waivers. And what was it, John, 2014, January 2014?
Yep, January of 2014.
They came out with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Of course, everybody probably knows this, came out with a new set of requirements for states in which to comply, and basically talks about individual initiative and autonomy and independence and helping people make life choices, where they live and with whom they live, what they do during their day, their own schedules. Do the folks that live in your residential settings have a key to their homes? Do they have access to certain things? This is transformative. This, if you want that federal money, and trust me, every state does, the states need to be in compliance with this. So again, the New York Times articles is one reason why we're doing this, but so is the CMS settings rule another reason why we're doing this. And in my opinion, this is a wonderful confluence of in some cases not so good things, but really it's necessary to take a look at the way direct support professionals are doing their jobs, and are they having or do they possess the tools to do their jobs well. One more slide on the federal requirements, and this is an interesting thing. You've got until 2019, is it, John?
March of 2019, March 17th, 2019.
St. Patrick's Day, 2019. Everybody who receives services through the waiver must have a written person-centered plan, and I believe that's happening now in New York State, and if we have listeners from other states, I'm sure it's happening there as well. It's been a requirement for a long time. And do these person-centered service plans reflect risk factors, and do they have measures in place to minimize the risk factors, because we support people who exhibit some risky behaviors, and that's fine. But here's where it changes. The individual will lead the person-centered planning process where possible, and the person-centered planning process will include the people chosen by the individual. If you're my support team, all of you out there listening to me, and John is my nurse, and my nurse thinks I should be on a 1,800 calorie diet. Guess what, John?
What's that, Joe?
You're not invited to my planning meeting next time.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Because I'm directing the process, and we're going to get into some of this stuff too. And so this is the federal government helping states and helping providers understand what they believe is being person-centered. So much so they used that phrase person-centered 272 times in that settings rule. They're serious about it. But when we look at this, we read these types of things through a different lens. I read the settings rule, and I wonder how it would affect direct support professionals. And I came up with 3 things. This is the first. People will have the freedom to support and control their own schedules and activities and have access to food at any time. Now, if any of you have ever worked an overnight and somebody that you support woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and were hungry and wanted to cook a meal, I would say a lot of direct support professionals would redirect that person back to bed, perhaps offering them a healthy substitute for a full meal, but redirect people because I just cleaned the kitchen, you're going to wake other people up, it's not time to have a full meal, what about your diet? A host of different reasons why we're not going to do this. Now, I don't have the answers, But I could tell you that direct support is a job of relationship, and the better relationship that you have with the people, the better you will be able to navigate this new federal requirement. And by the way, the state of New York will be coming out during the survey process to check on these types of things. The second one is people will be able to have visitors of their choosing at any time. Well, that's tricky because we won't even get into romantic visitors, visitors who may want to spend the night. But what about visitors that we may not approve of? What about visitors of people who live in their own homes and live in their own apartments that we visit a couple times a week, and a visitor who may be living on the couch in a person's apartment that we support? How does a direct support professional navigate that and helping that person understand their rights, but also some responsibilities to protect our efforts to protect people from harm and keeping people safe? We have to balance all of these things. And the third thing is people will have the freedom to furnish and decorate their own bedrooms in their own homes, and sometimes, especially in group settings, and there's a lot of group settings in New York State. What if somebody wants to hang something in their bedroom that is offensive, something that we may feel to be offensive to others, and how do we help people understand that? It's a process, and I can ask the question, are your direct support professionals currently prepared to do these things, to meet these new reasons? Because that is why the system needs to be transformed for direct support professionals, but with direct support professionals doing it. So John, I'm going to turn it over to you, and let's just talk a little bit of how are we preparing direct support professionals. Why don't you go?
Sure, Joe. Just to say, when we say, we hear the word transformation, there's an underlying notion that, well, we have to change something that might be bad. And I think there are some things certainly that have not been the greatest in our history of supporting people with disabilities. However, I got to say, as well as I'm sure you can attest to, Joe, I've known so many direct support professionals over the last 30 years that have done unbelievable work and that continue to do unbelievable things. Like you said, unspectacularly every day, right? So when we talk about transformation, we're talking about developing, I think, a new sense of what direct support's about based on what we're going to talk about for the rest of this webinar. But we have to talk about direct support professionals, unfortunately, as an entry-level position. I think those of you that know what the NADSP stands for, we don't believe that direct support is an entry-level type of job. Direct support is a profession, and professions aren't entry-level. Jobs are entry-level, but although our system sees direct support professionals in this entry-level manner, when we look at direct support as a profession, and you can go back to that last slide, Joe, I'm sorry, I just wanted to open it up there. This is an old proverb. Like we assume it's a Chinese proverb. We don't know. We saw it on the internet, on Facebook, and we liked it. But the bottom line is this. When we look at the way we train direct support professionals, and I'll talk about that word training in just a second, and when we talk about how to transform a system, because at this webinar, the why and the how, Joe has set up clearly what the why is, why we need to transform the system. How we're going to do it has to start with how we develop direct support professionals and train them, quote unquote. But generally the way we do train direct support professionals now, we bring them into rooms, whether it's an orientation an agency sponsors for their staff, or whether it's an annual mandatory training such as first aid or CPR or bloodborne pathogens, or all these mandatory trainings that direct support professionals must have, which are all good. But we generally bring people in the rooms and just talk at them. Maybe we'll show them a PowerPoint like this that you're watching. Maybe give them some type of test. We'll have them sign a sign-in sheet, and for whatever reasons, that is what's looked at in terms of complying with the training requirements for direct support professionals throughout New York State, well, throughout the country, really. We would say that that's not the way in which people learn. You see, when we tell people stuff, they forget it. When we teach people, they might remember. Teaching is a little bit more in line with what happens with CPR, and that's a particular type of training that direct support professionals, they really enjoy. They find that they learn and remember if they ever have to unfortunately perform CPR, their training kicks in. What they've got through being taught CPR, and that's teaching, where an instructor shows somebody in a very, very visceral way, using the body, using muscles, using visuals, using mannequins. If anybody that's listening, and probably most everybody that's listening has taken a CPR course, it's very physical. And with that teaching, that CPR instructor is going to test you and going to watch you perform CPR on a mannequin, and will give you the go-ahead that, okay, yeah, you can go for the next year, you're good. But we believe strongly, absolutely, at the NADSP, and what we're going to talk about in terms of these regional centers that New York has developed, we need to see more involvement with learners. Anybody learning anything, but particularly direct support professionals learning the best practices of direct support. The only way that they're going to really truly learn is by being involved in the learning process, by showing their competence, illustrating what they've learned through perhaps work samples and portfolios, and through oral presentations and all kinds of different stuff that we'll get into. But when we look largely at the way we've prepared direct support professionals, I'll be the first to admit I don't think we've done a very good job. We have to change that, and we're seeing that change. So that said, that slide will lead us to the rest of our conversation here. You can go to the next slide, Joe. As I said, we see direct support professionals as entry level. It's not. It's the farthest from an entry-level job. An entry-level job would be more like a fast food worker's job, and that's with due respect to fast food workers. Fast food workers can go and in 40, 50, maybe 60 hours can learn what they need to learn to do what they need to do to serve fast food. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a great thing. But that's an entry-level job. When we look at what direct support is, has never been a job. It will never be a job. It's a profession. It's filled with competencies, with skills, with values, with ethics, with a knowledge base that far exceeds any kind of entry-level job that you could compare it to. That said, when we look at training for direct support, we've got to see it differently. When we look at the second bullet there, requirements for direct support professionals, the reality is the requirements are very minimal. This is not just in New York State, it's all throughout the country. If you have some kind of GED or high school diploma, you have a reasonably clean driver's license, you have a clean criminal background check, and you have the aptitude for working with people, we're going to hire you. We're going to hire you. We're going to hire you for a lot of reasons, but primarily we're going to hire you because we need you. That we have to look at a little bit more closely as we transform a system. We can't just hire people because they can fill a spot. We have to hire people because they want to do this profession and because they are qualified to do this profession. When we look at onboarding or orientation for direct support professionals, and I used to do this when I worked at a provider organization for many years, and I'll be the first to admit I was guilty of this. We needed to get people through that orientation process so that they could go into the homes and into the places where they were going to do their direct support. We had to do that fairly quickly because of the turnover. Oftentimes I would run orientations once a month, sometimes twice a month, and those orientations would have 25, 30 people in them to go to support all kinds of various programs and services. But when we look at the way in which all that a direct support professional needs to know, excuse me, and needs to learn in the initial few months of their profession as a direct support professional, it takes more than 2 or 3 weeks. It's a long process. We have to look at onboarding and orientation in a much more protracted way. We sadly, if we look at the fourth bullet point there, we sadly, in our system throughout the country, we provide read and sign experiences for direct support professionals. And what those are simply, look at this piece of paper. This piece of paper has on it important things you need to know. Please read it. Please attest that you've read it by signing this sign-in sheet. Thank you very much. Let's go on to the next. That is common. It's very common in the human services, unfortunately. It's common in other arenas and other professions. But Joe, I like what you say about read-in signs, that a lot of us, we don't realize the impact of read-in signs, especially if we're hanging out in a hotel room. You want to just talk about that for a second?
Well, I think the mother of all read-in signs is when you check into a hotel and you go to use the internet and they ask, do you agree to the terms and conditions of our internet use? And I don't know anybody, I've never met anybody who actually read those. You just click yes.
Yeah, right.
Let's move along, John.
I know. So the bottom line there, we can't do that to direct support professionals. Ultimately, we can't do that to the people that they're supporting, because I've seen read and sign material that is important. Maybe dealing with fire safety, maybe dealing with nutrition and choking or something like that. That's not training. So lastly, direct support professionals, we talk to a lot of direct support professionals at the NADSP, and they'll tell us, and I don't think this is a mystery, training can be boring. I think there's probably a lot of good trainers out there. I know there are a lot of good trainers out there, but largely it's lackluster, it's boring. Oftentimes it's meeting certain mandates. We've got to change that. We've got to develop direct support professionals with best practices of person-centered support, of how to help people build and maintain relationships, how to really facilitate personal growth, all these types of things, which you're going to see in a few minutes. New York State is really looking to foster and to develop in direct support professionals. This has been predicted. This was predicted many, many years ago, that there will be a crisis in workforce for the direct support workforce in the human services, and we're seeing it. The demand we're seeing right now is absolutely at an all-time high. It will increase. Our economy is getting better. When the economy gets better, anybody listening to this broadcast they know that it's much more difficult to find direct support professionals willing to come to do this work. We see that there's a demand for much better quality, much more competence when it comes to direct support professionals. Family members, disabilities are demanding that direct support professionals are much more qualified and much more skilled at what they do. And to do that needs what we're going to be talking about, what New York State's doing with a competency-based evaluation system, the first of its kind in the country, which we're very proud of, which we'll talk about in a second. When we look at development and education of direct support professionals and rethinking that as to how we make this transformation possible, we have to meet direct support professionals where they're at, and where they're at demographically. When we say they're a non-academic workforce, does not mean that they're not intelligent people, direct support professionals. In fact, they're very intelligent people, but generally those that do direct support are not interested in the kinds of pursuits, academic pursuits, that other professions might be involved in. What we see, the demographic of direct support professionals in the United States, and I'm not going to get into the exact specifics, but largely the majority of people that do direct support are women, primarily single women, mothers. English is a second or third language. We have to meet that demographic, and we're doing better at it, but we have to do better. Much better in the course of the next few years. If you take a look at this slide, direct support professionals don't learn in a classroom. Their classroom is when they're doing what they're doing, and when they're being mentored and supervised and taught and coached by whether it's their supervisor or their trainer. When they're at that group home, at 9:30 at night, helping people with their daily routine at night, how to support people in their life space can only be done, and you can only learn that by being in that life space. You really can't learn that in a classroom. Lectures and all that stuff that we bring direct support professionals into these fancy training rooms. Again, there's a spot for that and a time for that, and we're not saying that's all bad, but ultimately that's not where the real learning happens. We find that direct support professionals appreciate, and not only appreciate, they love to tell stories about their skill, about their competence. And when we hear stories about competence, or when a supervisor hears a direct support professional talking about what they've done during their day, stories of their day, which we're going to talk to when we talk. I'm going to talk about that when we talk about the competencies. Stories are powerful, and in fact, stories are probably the most important vehicle to measuring competence for direct support professionals. We'll get to that. Ethics. We cannot have a direct support workforce without a direct support workforce that ultimately lives and breathes ethics in the activities of their daily work. We'll talk about that too. The rest of this is pretty straight ahead. You can read it. What it all comes down to is that when we develop and when we see the challenge of developing the direct support workforce, we do have to make a sea change in terms of the way in which we teach and educate direct support professionals. We've got to get away from the notion of training people, and we've got to get into the mindset that we need to develop and educate and foster competent direct support professionals by our mentorship, by our coaching, and by our teaching. Next slide, John. This is yours.
Okay, so thanks, John. Part of the transformation is, again, going from caretaking to providing support. And, you know, if you've been around long enough, I've been in this field for over 30 years, and when I was hired, I was basically hired to be a caretaker, focusing on health and safety and providing coverage, and you know, we had some other responsibilities, but that was largely it. And now what we're asking is a completely different set of skills for DSPs. Yeah, we still have to be responsible for making sure that there is adequate coverage, and we are certainly focusing on health and safety issues, but we're also asking DSPs to be ambassadors of our organization, ambassadors of our profession, mentors and teachers, and walking in partnership with people, and not having that power and control over people. You need to be culturally competent. More and more direct support professionals are being asked to work in family settings, and it's a tricky place to work because you don't have supervision, and sometimes, you know, family settings can, you know, they're not easy to navigate, and we're asking DSPs to go into a family setting to support somebody, a child or an adult, for 2 or 3 hours a day, and that requires a lot of flexibility, a lot of listening, a lot of different types of support, and lastly, helping people understand their own decisions. You know, when we were hired back in the day, John, we were told to follow the plan. The plans were written by the professionals, clinicians. I worked in an ICF setting, and we had so many goals and so many plans to follow, and a lot of people, actually everybody in the group home that I worked in had a toothbrushing goal, and it was a challenge because, frankly, the people didn't want to work on a toothbrushing goal. And how do you make toothbrushing person-centered? And years ago, somebody brought it to my attention. Somebody in New York brought it to my attention. You're providing person-centered toothbrushing if somebody that you're supporting, if you know if that person uses warm water or cold water to rinse. Now, think about that. That is certainly being person-centered. So there's ways. We were filling shifts. The big thing back in the early 80s were community outings. And I don't know about you guys, but we did van rides, and we documented that. And that's not good enough anymore. Now, in this transformation, we're going to see DSPs helping the people they support to create their own plans. And I would probably venture a guess that most people will not be writing plans to learn how to brush their teeth. It'll be things like I want a job, I want a relationship, I want more friends, these types of things that are really important to people, not what's important for people. Perhaps the most important part of a job, in my opinion, is helping people build and maintain friendships and relationships. We know many people with disabilities are lonely, and the notion of social capital, so many people speak of social capital, and I love this from Mother Teresa. Loneliness and the feeling of being unwanted is the most terrible of poverty, and a lot of people that we support do not have adequate, a lot of friends. And that's our job as direct support professionals, to help them find friends, because people who have more friends are happier and they're healthier, and that's a fact. Inclusion is different than going for van rides. Inclusion is, do people miss you when you're not there? And these are things that DSPs are going to be striving for. Here we go. This is kind of the how. You're not going to transform a system without transforming direct support, and you're not going to transform direct support without these three things. And I have, please excuse me, I have the NADSP competency areas. We're talking about the OPWDD core competencies here. They are interchangeable. The knowledge is the training that John spoke of, the quality of the training that we give. Is it based on sound research? Is it well delivered? Are direct support professionals involved in the training? Are they able to demonstrate, that knowledge on the job? And that comes in the form of skills, the competencies. Every direct support professional in New York State are going to be evaluated by the same skill set in the evaluation tool, which we are going to do another webinar later on in the series. But these skills have been deemed universal across the state. So the skills are the behaviors on the job. How do I provide these services to the people that I support? And am I doing it with any intention? Because if I'm just intuitively helping somebody develop a friendship or maintain a relationship with a family member, that's quite different than knowing how to help somebody develop a friendship or maintain a relationship with a family member, and what goes into all of that process. That's intentional, and those are the skills. And lastly, the values are the code of ethics, which we're so happy that OPWDD adopted the code of ethics. And John, I'm going to turn this over to you, since you're the one that's traveling the state with some of our other faculty members. Why don't you talk just real briefly about how OPWDD is doing this transformation?
Sure. And it's you take a look, and I recommend everybody on this slide. You'll see at the bottom the www.workforcetransformation.org website. We'll talk about that at the very end. It's a powerful, important place for you to get the information that you need to know about this workforce transformation. But ultimately, I think the vision of a lot of people at OPWDD, specifically Regis Obujiski, he had an idea when he started to work at OP a few years ago to develop regional centers. And these regional centers are not bricks and mortar per se. They're not places to go. What they are, because New York State is divided, it's so big, it's divided up into five regions. Each of these regions has a lead person that is involved in collecting and collectively working with all stakeholders in those particular regions that you see there on the screen to all types of incredible training opportunities and development opportunities for direct support professionals and also for others involved in our system of supporting people with developmental disabilities. Each of these regional centers are very unique. Part of the vision was you didn't want to have something put out as a franchise and almost dictated by OPWDD. I think the architects of these regional centers wanted these regional centers to take the culture of each of their areas. If you take a look at New York City is a place with unbelievable amounts of different ethnicities and languages and cultures. When you go to, in the very rural part of northern New York, you're not going to see that vast array of of diversity necessarily. So that said, these regional centers will cater to the needs of direct support professionals and the organizations within those regions. Yeah, Joe?
John, if I may, I just want to make two notes. One is Region 2 is split in half. There's a Region 2 North and then a Region 2 South, just because of the geographic size of that particular region. And also, I just noticed that I need to update this slide because I believe some of the people that are identified as directors or deputy directors have changed.
Yes.
But nonetheless, this is a really nice graphic, and again, throughout the course of the series of these webinars, we'll get deeper into the regional centers. But let's just talk, John, briefly about the core competencies.
Yeah, absolutely. This, in I think our strong opinion at the NADSP, is probably the most important part of the foundation for the transformation of the workforce. And what it is are the core competencies. The core competencies, very simply, are what direct support professionals will do every day, will be evaluated by and evaluated against every day. And you can read it right here. This is not a training program. You don't go get a training on the core competencies. What these are the day-to-day tasks, skills, and actions and behaviors of direct support professionals. They have been codified. A work group got together over the course of 2-3 years to develop these core competencies, and they are comprehensive, they are thorough, and what they will do, they will show direct support professionals, ultimately the 110,000 of them that are in New York State, they will show them what it is that they need to be responsible to be doing every day with the people they support. Simple as that. And if you take a look at the next slide, I think you're going to see them all in their glory. And there they are.
I also want to mention that this is former Commissioner Courtney Burke. I apologize to the current acting commissioner, but Courtney Burke was the mover of the whole workforce transformation, and she was the person who established the stakeholder group that created the core competencies and really pushed the code of ethics. So that's her quote. But there's the 23 New York State core competencies, John. Go ahead.
Look at them. Yeah, I'm sorry, Joe. When you look at them, when I do I go around the state talking about these and helping people understand these and demystify them. When you look at this, you see a forest. You see lots and lots of trees. And sometimes when we see a forest, it can be a little overwhelming. When we look at these initially, either as a direct support professional or as a supervisor or as perhaps a brand new person coming into the field, you say, oh my gosh, I have to know all this stuff. Oh my goodness. When you look at the forest, it's overwhelming. But however, you look at an individual tree within the forest, we've got 23 trees, A through W. Unfortunately, there's a lot of these competencies, and that's okay. But they're lettered. There's 23, A through W. When you look at an individual, one of these core competencies, you'll see that it's something that direct support professionals, they do every day. And you take a look at competency S, supporting safety. My goodness, we talk about direct support professionals over the course of the last 30, 40 years. They're going to still need to support safety. They're going to still need to protect at times. And when you look at what supporting safety means, that could mean anything from helping somebody who maybe has a gait issue, who perhaps has trouble walking or ambulating, helping them get onto a public bus, helping people down a flight of stairs, supporting safety, making sure that people have their seatbelts on when they're driving in a vehicle. I mean, talk about a low-hanging fruit. Supporting safety is something, as a competency, can be measured, can be observed, and can be improved. You can improve all of these areas, by the way. But let's look at another I think more perhaps difficult competency to meet. And if you look at D, competency area D, facilitating personal growth and development. Direct support professionals have an obligation to help the people they support grow and become better people and become educated and developed and improve their lives. And facilitating personal growth and development can be anything from helping somebody learn how to play a musical instrument to obtain their driver's license, to learn how to cook. It's really kind of endless, but that is a little bit more difficult to measure. And those that are going to be doing this measurement and the evaluation of the core competencies that direct support professionals will perform, those are going to be essentially the supervisors of these direct support professionals. So that said, the supervisors and the mentors of direct support professionals are going to need to know these competencies just as much, if not more so, than the direct support professionals that they're going to be evaluating.
And John, I would just add, excuse me, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. You'll be hearing a lot more from the regional centers. So if you're not working with your regional centers, please go to the website and get more information, because there's so much information on the website, and there's a lot of training opportunities available to you. This stuff, as John says, it looks intimidating, but I can tell you when you break it down and you use stories and things like that, it really pops out at you. John, let's talk about the code a little bit.
Sure.
Because we've only got 5 or 6 minutes left.
Oh my goodness, we can't go another hour? Come on. Right.
You can.
Yeah, okay. I think people want to go to lunch. Here's the deal. Back in 2001, the National Alliance for Direct Support Professionals authored and published the Code of Ethics, the only Code of Ethics for direct support professionals in the country, the only one since. And over the course of the last 15, 16 years, it's being more and more used. New York State adopted the Code of Ethics as something that direct support professionals in New York State need to kind of live by and attest to. They adopted that back in 2012. The Code of Ethics, very simply, is it's the values of our profession. It's the values of the profession of direct support. When we look at any profession has a competency base, has a knowledge base, and ultimately has a values base. Our values base in direct support is the Code of Ethics. New York State, embedded in the core competencies and the evaluation process for those core competencies that we saw previously, direct support professionals have to exhibit professional behavior. And part of the exhibition of that professional behavior is reliant upon their understanding of the NADSP Code of Ethics, their attestation to this Code of Ethics, and ultimately what they do day to day in helping people make decisions and supporting people with disabilities. They have to do it in an ethical manner. So when we do look at the Code of Ethics, and we could spend an entire webinar, as we have before, on the Code of Ethics, take a look at it on that website. You can go to nadsp.org as well and find the Code of Ethics there too.
I just want to, John. I just want to interrupt you again. No, I just want to let everybody know that very, very soon we are going to, with the help of actually OPWDD, we have updated the Code of Ethics. We took a look at it, 16-year-old document. We needed to use more contemporary language. We basically gave it a new set of clothes. And Diane Hank from OPWDD was a very highly contributing member of this task group that we have. It doesn't change in spirit. It doesn't change in focus. It changes a little bit with some very subtle wording that is more person-centered. And as Regis Obajiski says, the Code of Ethics will inspire you and it will challenge you. And we're really happy that this is going to be unveiled in a major way, probably in 2 weeks' time. This is a word cloud, and the word clouds are basically a visual of a body of text, and these words pop out at you with different sizes, and the sizes are relative to the number of times it's used in the text. And of course, DSPs support people. And they do so much more than that. So the regional centers are really involved in spreading this transformation in ways that are doable and supportive from peers and colleagues. John and a few other trainers have gone out and helped organizations understand how to implement these really important pieces to DSP development, but also to understand the evaluation tool, using the evaluation tool in a way that is productive and encourages DSP growth, and not be intimidated by that evaluation tool. And I believe we're going to have an evaluation tool training later in this series.
Yes, I'll be doing that.
You will. I
will
can't wait. I cannot wait, John.
It'll be cool.
It's good stuff. This was largely a recap. This is an introduction to workforce transformation. We know many of you may have heard this information from us before, but I think it is important to do this early on in this series to help people not forget why we're doing it. It's just not another edict coming down. It's not just another unfunded mandate. This is necessary. Make no mistake, there's a workforce crisis out there. The improving economy has made things worse for providers, and your rates are not being improved to attract people with better wages. We have to build with what we have, and I think that this transformation with the adopting the Code of Ethics and implementing the core competencies is a good first step in creating that next profession. Those are my closing words. I would just remind you all to take a look at your email. Please fill out that survey. I'd like to thank OPWDD. I'd like to thank the good leads, the great workforce champions at the regional centers, and I'd like to thank my colleague John Rafaelle for helping me share this important information with you all. John, anything else you want to add?
No, this is good news, everybody. Please don't be overwhelmed. And contact us if you feel overwhelmed, because we want to get you through this, because we know this is the future. It's really good stuff.
We have about 3 minutes if there's any questions. Oh, here's a question. You say New York State has 23 core competencies. Is it not nationwide now? An excellent question. New York State, when developing the core competencies, they researched what other competency sets were out there for direct support professionals, and they used the NADSP as a kind of an anchor for the development of competency set for New York State. They basically took NADSPs. You can crosswalk them within the New York State competency set. Those 23 core competencies, you can find the NADSP's national set. And by the way, our national set has been adopted by the United States Department of Labor as the model for long-term supports and services. But these are specific to New York, by which all DSPs in New York will be responsible to follow. So they're very, very close, but we believe, like every other profession, like nursing and social work and psychologists, they all have universal competencies. You're not making them up. They are embedded within the profession. And we're starting to see a path across the country that DSPs will have that same set of professional competencies, because right now people are being trained differently everywhere we go. Am I right or am I wrong, John?
No, you're right on target. And yeah, we're gonna see probably in the next 10 years. My prediction is that states will require direct support professionals to be evaluated in a competency-based way. Universal competencies, yes.
With that, I will thank you all for joining us. We are right on time. Please mark that on your evaluations. Have a great afternoon, and we'll be in touch real soon. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody. See you.